Alright, we've got two more to talk about, and I was initially going to start with Nomadland, but I'm just kind of so excited to talk about Promising Young Woman, I think I'm going to go ahead and start with it instead. And given the pretty much massive acclaim that it's reached, I'm assuming that most people have not made the mistakes that I made going into this, because I mean, I didn't really know too much about the concept going in, but or the fact that it's being built up as like a revenge movie when it's kind of more of an avenge movie, if that makes sense. And obviously, it's focused on the what's a response, I guess you could say, to the whole Brock Turner thing, the dude that was at Stanford that raped that girl while she was unconscious and got a really light sentence that he only ended up even serving like half of, and everybody kind of in his circle that was defending him, including the people that were, in charge of this case at all, were dismissing it and saying that he was a promising young man and all that bullshit. So you can kind of see where that's comes into play, where it's not necessarily just avenging, one or more characters in the movie, but kind of coming from a real place as well. And Emerald Fennell is it's her writing and directing debut, I believe, or at least her directing debut. And the thing about this is when it started, and kind of being vague on the concept going in, this whole thing where Adam Brody picks up Carey Mulligan in the bar and she seems like she's really drunk and out of it. So he decides he's going to be the nice guy and take her back home before anybody else gets to her, any like unsavory person gets to her. And then conveniently this turns into, oh, well, why don't we just go to my place instead? And then it turns out that Adam Brody isn't the nice guy that he appears to be and that we usually see him as. And then she basically shows that she's not sober, and this was all kind of a setup to trap him. And that's it. And going into it, seeing it advertised as like a revenge movie, it became clear quickly that this was not the movie that I kind of thought it was going in, but I wasn't entirely sure still. I mean, I assumed that it had to be more elaborate, and less, like, not as extreme as she kills them or something like that. But it just seemed so. I wasn't really sure what was going on and what exactly it was she was doing. And then as it goes on, it's like, okay, I do think I might get what's going on. And then at some point halfway through, it's like there's like a click, and it was like, oh yes, I've got it now. Because there's the one path, and then there's the other path that it goes down, like maybe 20 minutes in or so. Which, like I said, I don't know what people know going in, so I'm going to try to be vague, but it kind of sets it up like it's this one thing, like the whole Adam Brody thing, and then about 20 minutes in, a kind of new plan forms and takes the movie in a different direction. And then it's like, around the time it gets to the Connie Britton scene is when, like, I had this sudden revelation of what exactly was happening here. Because I think what was happening and what my problem was that I was talking about that I hope other people don't have is that I wasn't giving it the time to unravel itself. Like, very early on I was going, I have no idea what the fuck this even is, or, like, what the point is exactly. And then it's like, because it's I, for some reason, wasn't giving it time to show itself and reveal itself gradually, which is what it was doing. I was just kind of immediately under the impression that something was already happening that I just wasn't getting. But you do kind of have to watch it kind of play out, and then once it reaches a certain point, it's like it reaches that point that's sort of... It's this sort of unmatched feeling when you're watching a movie and then suddenly you get it. It's like I said, maybe I was like, way too late on that, but it's a really good feeling when you reach that point, especially if what the movie's doing is pretty brilliant. So, going into that, it does kind of start off as the thing where you hear about the guys that are like the nice guys, as they call themselves, and it's those guys that are like, if they have to tell you they're a nice guy, that's probably a red flag. And the way she deals with them, but we see visually in a way that's never completely explained, in her notebook where she keeps track of these guys that she traps like that, and it's kind of the different variations of where that kind of thing can go. And she's kind of keeping almost like a log of that. But then things kind of shift a little bit when she runs into Bo Burnham, and it seems like there's going to be like a love story here. And the great thing that Carey Mulligan does throughout the whole thing is there's first off right away. She's an intriguing character because you kind of spend the first 20 minutes trying to piece together what exactly it is that she's doing and why. But then there's a lot of other things going on here where she has to like because of what's going on here and because of the way her character is, she in the tones that the movie goes into, because it feels like a lot of this movie is dark comedy over anything else. While there is some really heavy drama stuff in it, and a lot of kind of suspense just kind of surprisingly pops up in places when you're not quite sure where it's going to go, and then suddenly when you realize, it's got a lot of that. And because of the way this character is and what it is she's doing, she probably could have gone really over the top and made it almost like a campy sort of thing. But somehow with all these tones happening like around her, she somehow finds a way to like fit in like a puzzle piece to every single one of those as they come along, and she never really reaches that sort of campy area. But two other things on top of that are there's the whole Bo Burnham thing where she's got to be like this sort of just like traditional love story, which kind of seems out of place, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that whole storyline for a while. But when you see everything else, like the way the other side of this is the fact that her character could easily be seen as really unlikable, because even though she is going after people that deserve it, there's also some people that just walk into the coffee shop she works at that she's just sort of snarky to for seemingly no reason. And that could probably be off-putting for like the sake of her being a protagonist. But then when you kind of balance that with these Bo Burnham scenes, and you kind of see when she kind of like opens up to him a little bit, and it's almost like she becomes a different character entirely, which was kind of throwing me off at first. But then you kind of realize the whole, it's like when we see her with Bo Burnham is basically what she probably could have been if there hadn't been tragedy in her life that changed her so significantly. And one might say that she's showing the, you know, traits of a promising young woman when she's with Bo Burnham, versus what she seems to have become because of the tragedy in her life and the path that that's taken her down. And then it all kind of makes sense, and then it shows not just the different facets of the movie and how they're all kind of coming together in this really great way, but Mulligan's performance has to keep up with those tones changing. And she does like every time in a way that's like a way that's so amazing you don't even really appreciate it till like long after the fact. That you kind of have to piece together why the performance works so well, and it's right in line with why the movie itself works so well. So, yeah, any awards attention she gets, I am very happy about. And there's also stuff where it's the idea of it being like a revenge movie, where it's like a fantasy movie, I guess you could say. And it's, so the fact that it's going to kind of feel a bit, like it feels heightened without necessarily being an over-the-top movie in general. Because another thing that I found kind of off-putting, was kind of throwing me off, that only made sense in retrospect, was that there, every now and then, there's like kind of a really obvious contrivance, or like just these real weird conveniences that help the story fall into place. Like specific, like there's one moment where for Carey Mulligan's plan to really fall into place here, she's gonna need a teenage girl's phone. And the way she goes, we see her get the phone before we realize she's gonna need the phone later, and the way she gets it is she says something that in no way would probably ever get somebody to respond in this manner. But in this particular scene, she just says something, and it makes the girl say, "Oh, well, here, have my phone there." Because Carey Mulligan says, I'm going to take you somewhere, but I don't want it on social media or anything. and the girl's response to "I don't want this on social media" is "Here, take my phone." And it's like that's the kind of thing that just kind of stands out in this way of, well, that was convenient. But I do think it's that whole thing of the movie, in a sense, has to feel a bit like a fantasy, to where that's how it would. Like if you were just daydreaming that you would pull off a plan like this, just the way things would fall into place like that. And because there's another scene that kind of makes that stand out also, where it's because everything that Mulligan does is so calculated and like so like a long con. And so there is a moment where she just straight, like right in the middle of this plan, she just straight up gets out of her car and smashes the lights on a car of a guy that's there, like catcalling her. And it's like moments like that that almost feel like we're late enough in the movie at that point to where it's not surprising she would just do something like that. But in pretty much every other circumstance, you would think that was just some fantasy sequence or something. Like she would do that, and then there'd just be a cut, and she would just be sitting in her car where nothing had happened. But so stuff like that, where it's like it does tell like this full story, but there are those moments where it does get the sense, like an intentional sense, that this is really just kind of a fantasy. Like, for instance, somebody that would hear the Brock Turner story and then just kind of daydream about what that would make you want to do. And this is the movie that acts on that. So that's, it's like I said, when you got to take kind of everything into account with this movie if you're going to go from like detail to detail and say, well, this doesn't work for this reason. The whole thing is, piecing together one whole package. So it's definitely something that kind of, something I was going to say at the beginning that I forgot was the fact that this is probably the most hyped I've been for a while, at least as long as I can remember, to see a movie again. Like it was a case where as soon as it ended, I was ready to I wanted to immediately start it over again. And that's not something that happens to me very often at all. And so this was, yeah, it's just one of those. And as far as like casting goes, there's a lot of really inspired choices here, where we have like Clancy Brown and Jennifer Coolidge are her parents, and given the kind of character she is, and the kinds of characters that Clancy Brown and Jennifer Coolidge have played in the past, you'd almost kind of imagine just hearing that what her parents must be like, and it's like the most downplayed Clancy Brown and Jennifer Coolidge have probably ever been in their entire careers. And like I said, there's almost something sort of off-putting but funny about them, where they basically want her out of the house because she's 30 and hasn't really done much with her life, to the point that for her birthday they gift her a suitcase, but they just do it in like they're giving her like any sort of amazing gift. They just kind of have that sort of parent smile, and that's all they really kind of do. I feel like most of 90% of their scenes, if not more than that, is just sitting at the dining room table. But they do as much with that as they need to get this point across. And then there's the casting of some of the more unsavory characters, if you want to put it lightly, like characters that you would see in like comedies, or you would usually play more likable characters. Like Christopher Mintz-Plasse is one of the guys that she tricks at the beginning, and that's Adam Brody, definitely fits that mold. And then there's another case altogether, with Max Greenfield, Max Greenfield's an actor that I have praised many times in the past, and that's going to continue now, where he is probably still one of the most likable actors out there. Like just as soon as you see his face, it's just like, yes, I love that he's in this, because I just love his presence in general. And he's always playing these really likable characters. And his character is probably one of the most unexpectedly dark characters. But what's interesting about that is not only is he such a dark character, but we learn this in a comedic fashion and at about the most unexpected time in the movie. It's wild. And that's Yeah, so to avoid pretty much saying too much, I don't know if there's anything else I can really mention, but there is like it's another one of those cases where every now and then there's like little details that just kind of stand out. Like there's a crucial couple of scenes with Alison Brie, and before we even meet her, Bo Burnham mentions that she just had twins, and so when she goes to Alison Brie's Facebook page later, just kind of the picture at the top is just a picture of twin babies, and it's just shown like really quickly for like a second, and it's like just details like that are appreciated. Um, and there is use of a song at the end, which is really interesting because it's it's just right off the top of my head. I can probably think of 5 movies, and that's not even exaggerated. Like just right away, 5 movies that have used this song, and that are movies that come to mind when I hear this song. And it's usually long past this point that a song is completely played out, and it has just no effect anymore. And just every time you hear it, it's like, oh well, this again, and the scene just loses its impact because of that. But I don't know if it's because the song just always works, or if it also has to be the impact of this scene in general. Um, but it's like it's the last scene of the movie and a song plays, and it's I can't think of a more perfect sound to go with this. So the fact that it's finds a use for this song that should be long since played out and long since lost its impact, and it's probably one of the best uses of it ever, I think says a lot about the impact of the scene itself. So there is that. And like I said, the more I think about it, just the more I love it. And like I said, the more I just can't wait to revisit it. I really hope its physical release is not too far off, which these days it's not usually. So that might be it for that. And I might as well go ahead. It's because we're just kind of in one of those years, and even though we are getting a pretty decent batch here at the end, I feel pretty safe in saying that if we're not counting Hamilton, like if Hamilton doesn't count, this is probably easily my favorite movie of the year right now. So it'll be interesting to see if that can change in the next couple of months, but it's going to be difficult. So I guess we can go from that to Nomadland, which is probably one of the most acclaimed movies of the year. And I was talking to a friend recently about how it's kind of hard to go into movies this year, especially movies like Nomadland, movies that have been getting built up kind of the whole year. Because it's like we're finding out about movies through their awards and acclaim. So it's really hard to go into these. I think I talked about this with Sound of Metal also, where it's kind of difficult to go into these movies with reasonable expectations. Because they're being built up as like literally the greatest thing ever as you go into them. Um, so with that in mind, I could see a lot of people like. I mean, I feel like it's pretty clear. If you're the kind of person that feels like you're going to go into Nomadland and love it because you just love these kind of movies, this is going to be your thing, like all the way through. Um, and it's another one from Chloe Zhao, who did The Writer, of course. And this one is set in 2012, and in this, it gives us, like, in text, this whole opening where a plane is closed down, which has completely and entirely killed this town. These are still kind of the effects of 2008. And our main character, Frances McDormand, also, on top of all this loss, lost her husband as well. So now she's living this sort of nomadic life in her van, just going from place to place and living and running into people like her in communities for people like her. And that's the extent of it. They eventually Dave Strathairn comes in, and he kind of has this thread that's close to a narrative, the closest to a narrative that we get. But for the most part, it's the character interactions and all that are the star of this, and McDormand and her performance and all that. Where we're just kind of watching her live. Like, it was still, even though this movie is much more narrative driven, I kind of, even before going in, I was getting vibes of Wild, and I still kind of do, after having seen it. Like I said, this one is much less narrative driven, so obviously the thing that's really giving this movie attention is McDormand's performance, which is it's interesting to watch her interact with all these people and so naturally because, for instance, whether it's in a movie or in real life, you just kind of get the sense that Frances McDormand is one of those people that has the ability to be comfortable and confident pretty much anywhere around any group of people. She can pretty much just kind of assert herself and then just like convince you immediately that she belongs, even if she just walked in. And that goes a really long way in a movie like this, where we see her with all the different communities and all these people that are like sort of the book that it's based on is of course a nonfiction book about these actual people, and a lot of the people from the book are just here in it, and it's one of those cases where you can never quite tell what's real and what isn't, like when they just turned the camera on and said just be yourself or whatever, or if it's because obviously no matter what there's going to be like acting involved, even if it is a person just sort of playing themselves. um, but the fact that you can't really tell what's real and what was maybe kind of like a scene was pushed in a certain direction or dialogue was pushed in a certain direction, the fact that you really can't tell the difference it makes it pretty amazing already. And the fact that they do establish such a world where she can, be around a group of people and then she'll get in her van and go somewhere else and then eventually might run into some of those people again, and like it feels like this whole established world. um, and obviously it's going to have a lot of those moments where we just kind of watch her live, and this is one portion where I'm afraid I'm being too cynical about it, but it's like these moments where we just watch her live, where like she's just in her van. Usually there's scenes when it's like it's just her eating in silence or whatever, and this has been used as an introductory method to a character in like so many ways now, especially in indie movies. It kind of at one point had this really sort of intimate appeal, like just watching somebody live. But it's like we've grown so accustomed to seeing those kind of scenes in movies like this. I think the intimate appeal is kind of lost now, and it feels more like this is how we do this. Like it's starting a cliche in what was essentially this really kind of fresh and new thing that really showed characters in a way that we didn't see very often for a while. But that's still everything is still going to have this really real quality to it, regardless. But a lot more of the scenes that are much more interesting are the scenes where everybody's kind of interacting with each other, and because we kind of established the sort of she's like it doesn't really feel like she has like a longing for anything in particular, but you do get the sense that she's just kind of alone in herself a lot of the time. And it does kind of have like this sort of, especially when she's working, like when she's working at Amazon or something, it does kind of have like this sort of, like if you didn't know who Frances McDormand was, you would probably assume this was a documentary of sorts. Um, but and like I said, the way that she's able to blend in though, and especially I think with how downplayed everything is and how real everything feels, because when you look at probably her other two most famous performances in like Fargo and Three Billboards, where it's like because she has such a command of the screen always, but it seems like it's always in a different way. So when you look at Fargo and you look at Marge, where she's like where like Marge is really like straightforward and feels kind of seasoned, but yet there's still something like bubbly and funny about her, and friendly about her. And then you look at Mildred in Three Billboards, and it's like when she walks onto the screen, you almost want to kind of duck out of her way, and like you don't want to be in her line of fire at all. And then you compare those two things, which are already on completely different planets, and then you got this where like everything is just like silent weight, where like she can just kind of sit there and stare off or something, but you like feel all the loss and all the pain that led to her just sitting and staring off in this moment. So her ability to do that on top of just kind of blending in with everybody else, I think is where a lot of the acclaim really comes from, because there's really no big scenes or any really big moments in it, which I think is where a lot of the appeal is coming from. obviously there are crowds that might feel a bit underwhelmed by that, but like I said, if this is the kind of movie you go into wanting to see something like this is probably even more than what you want. So, like I said, we do eventually have the scenes with Darius Theron, which are also nice because he also kind of blends in. Also, like it is the case where if we didn't kind of follow them around so much, and it didn't feel like there was like a strand of a narrative starting, I feel like he would also be able to blend in a way to where if you didn't know Deus Ex by sight, you would assume he was just another one of them. Um, and there's also those moments that they kind of have together that feel kind of real, where it seems like because she can be a bit, standoffish to people, especially with I imagine the loss of her husband is what plays the biggest part in this, but it's like how he's kind of being more and more friendly to her the more he sees her and they run into each other. And you're never quite sure how she's going to react to him because she could tell him, to fuck off in the nicest way she knows how to in that moment. Like there's a moment when he tries to help her and he ends up breaking some of her dishes, and we just kind of expect her to go off. So she tells him to walk away, and you think there's going to be like a conflict here, where a moment where one of them has to apologize to the other, and there's that whole thing. But no, she tells him to walk away from the dishes he just broke. Now that she's angry about it, and the next time we see him, she's just taking care of him while he's sick. And it's like this because that's just how they. You just imagine they just naturally got over whatever that was, and just kind of went back to whatever they were doing. And it's stuff like that that's really appreciated, where it feels like the bullshit is just cut out of it, and it's all just feels kind of natural in itself as it goes along. Um, and we do get stuff also where we see sort of visually without them having to necessarily tell us um, how she got to this point in regards to what her life used to be. Where eventually, inevitably, there's going to be a scene where she goes back home because really she needs to, and it's just sort of watching her interact. And even there's also a moment where she meets David Strathairn's family, and it's like all these interactions where she's with her family or other people's family. Whenever she's like at a home, like at a place with a roof, you just get the sense that she's just so out of place. Where it's like even before all the stuff went down with like the plant shutting down and losing her husband and stuff like that, it's like this is what she was always kind of meant to do anyway. Like this is the way she was meant to live. Because it's like whenever she's in a place that seems like it's normal or like back to civilization or whatever, it just feels because we've lived vicariously through her so much and so effectively that when she feels out of place, we as the audience also kind of immediately feel like it just something doesn't feel right about it. So it's and we do have these like painfully sad moments, but there's nothing that feels like it's made to manipulate or anything like that. And you get a sense where it's very easy to see like how a lot of this could have gone down if it was more dramatized, and the difference is like very clear. So, yeah, so I'm not like in love with it as much as other people seem to be, but I can appreciate like how it accomplishes what it's doing, and how it doesn't really cave into anything to make the storytelling sort of easier. And you would think the easier way would be the way that it is now, just kind of letting everything naturally happen. But it's like I said, in a lot of stuff like this, you can almost see that there's like an urge in filmmakers to like, oh, well, we need to do something. So they add a little bit of a narrative or something that's a bit more dramatic than everything else, particularly towards the end. But this movie never really loses sight of itself, which is really impressive. So it just kind of is exactly what it is when it starts and when it ends and everything in between. So, yeah, so I can see where the acclaim comes from for sure. Yeah, so I think that's going to be it for these two. So, I think I still haven't talked about Tenet yet or Mank. The problem with Mank is I watched it, I feel like a month ago. It feels like a long time ago. And I was cold to it then, and I'm still cold to it now, to the point that I just really still don't know how I feel about it, if I feel anything about it at all. But I will try, I guess, to conjure something. to talk about with Mank, but we'll see how that goes. And Clooney's movie is out there, which I will eventually see, but it doesn't sound as promising as it once did. So we're just gonna kind of go around. I'll probably end up doing one of the blunt things next, and then we'll just go from there. And I'm sure me and my brother talked about doing something else at some point soon. And somebody in the comments mentioned directors, which will be very, very tough, but I'm sure we'll look into that eventually. So all of that, all these various things that could be happening at some point will. So until whatever's next, I think that's it.